Subcommittee will come to order. Good morning, Secretary DeVos. Good to see you this morning. And welcome to the subcommittee. This is our second budget hearing of the year, and it's your fourth hearing with us. So, and today, as you know, we are going to examine the President's Department of Education budget request for fiscal year 2021. As I was reviewing the budget materials, Madam Secretary, this much was clear to me, that you are seeking to privatize public education. I believe, and I've had this conversation before with you, I believe that's the wrong direction for our students and for our country. Instead, we need to be moving towards expanding public policies like early childhood education that we know help students to succeed. We see this in other countries around the globe. They are not shrinking public support, but in fact are expanding it. I'll get more into the consequences of the cuts that you are proposing, but I want to start by examining your privatization philosophy, the false premise on which it is built, and the research that it ignores. Contrary to your claims, the nation's public education system, which 90% of our children attend, has witnessed significant progress for all groups of students over the last 30 years. Average mathematics scores on the National Assessment of Educational Progress, NAEP, have improved for fourth graders by 13%, eighth graders by 7%, while overall reading improvements have been more modest. Black fourth grader scores improved by 6% and eighth graders by 3%. Hispanic fourth grader scores improved by 6% and eighth graders by 5%. These are significantly higher than 40 years ago for all racial and ethnic groups. And I reflect on that and ask myself the question, where would we be without federal investments? There is no question that there is more to do to address the disparities in achievement. We know we face significant challenges in assisting the kids that come into our system in education districts where they experience poverty and exposure to violence, often resulting in trauma. But the solution is not less resources, nor is it more privatization. Let me, if I can, just a quote for you from a report by Dr. Pamela Cantor, who is a psychiatrist. And she co-founded an educational organization called Turnaround for Children, which translates the science of learning and development into a problem solving in our schools. She led a team commissioned in New York City by the Board of Education to assess the impact of the terrorist attacks on the city's public school children. What did she find? Surprisingly, while 68% of the children they observed had experienced trauma sufficient to impair their functioning in school, it is from their ongoing experience of growing up in poverty, not from what they witnessed that terrifying September day. In fact, the administration's own data has shown how privatization has let students down. The Trump administration evaluated the DC Opportunity Scholarship Program and found that vouchers had a statistically significant negative impact on the mathematics achievement of impacted students. In other words, more vouchers, lower math achievement. That is not a lone data point either. Previous multi-sector studies using NAEP data have found that no student achievement scores for children in private schools were higher than those of children in public schools by any statistically significant degree. And I think they found this to be the case, I believe, in Indiana and in Louisiana, and there are other examples which I can make available to you and to your staff. So your push to privatize public education is based, in my view, on a false premise that it is not supported by data. But its consequences would be to undermine the education of our students in nearly every state, particularly for vulnerable students in high-need regions, including the rural parts of our country. You would end career and college readiness for 560,000 low-income middle school students across 45 states by eliminating the highly competitive grant program known as Gear Up, a minus $365 million. You would endanger academic tutoring, personal counseling, and other programs for 800,000 students in sixth grade by slashing TRIO programs by $140 million. TRIO serves low-income first-generation students and students with disabilities, helping them to graduate from college. You would endanger education access for children experiencing homelessness by eliminating the Education for Homeless Children and Youth program. It's minus $102 million. This funding is desperately needed. In the 2016-17 school year, more than 1.3 million enrolled children had experienced homelessness at some point in the past 3 years, an increase of 7% from 2014 to 2015. You would endanger youth literacy, as well as potentially increase class size and undermine efforts to support diverse teachers by eliminating the main program, Supporting Effective Instruction State Grants, which we increased for the first time in many years. And you've taken $2.1 billion away from this program. You would potentially put higher education out of the financial grasp of students by flat funding the Pell Grant. 40% of undergraduate students, or 7 million students, rely on Pell Grants to afford higher education. But while Pell covered 79% of the average costs of tuition, fees, room and board at a four-year public institution in 1975, it covers only 29% today. Our students cannot afford for us to stand pat for this. And finally, your budget would risk exacerbating the financial challenges of under-resourced rural districts by converting rural formula grants into the block grant. These districts already struggle with lower student populations, higher transportation costs, and your move to undermine their funding in this way is unacceptable. With all of us, and I just say this to you, Madam Secretary, with all sincerity, this is not going to happen. It is not going to happen. I am supportive of the recognition of the IDEA state grants, $100 million proposed increase, career and technical education, $680 million proposed increase for the CTE state grants. I am disappointed that adult education state grants are left with level funding, which I plan to ask you about later. You have also once again requested an increase for student loan servicing. We included new reforms, as you know, in fiscal year 2020 bill to help us conduct more oversight and ensure that borrowers are getting the help they need. Many of these ideas stemmed from an oversight hearing that this subcommittee held last year. And to be direct, I will need to see how the department implements the new requirements as I review your request for next year. With regard to charter schools, there is a place for them. They have a role in our education system. However, we have moved in the direction of creating a parallel education system. Concerns remain around issues of accountability and transparency, which to this point they have not been forthcoming. As I have said time and time again, I believe charter schools ought to be held to the same rigor, and where they fail, we need to know about it. And to close, Madam Secretary, you are clearly, again in my view, seeking to privatize public education. I hope that I have been clear that we are not going to do that. because doing so ignores the research indicating the gains we have made, ignores the many areas private education shortchanges students, ignores the very reason the federal government has needed to be involved in education, as so powerfully indicated with Brown versus the Board of Education, and ignores the spirit and the values of this country. No, instead, we need to be expanding public policies that boost education attainment, not restricting or reducing them. So I look forward to our discussion today, and now it's my pleasure to turn to my colleague, the ranking member of the subcommittee, Congressman Tom Cole from Oklahoma.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. I want to tell you this is my favorite time of year because I get to spend so much time with you in this committee hearing. We're going to have dinner tonight, and it's always a delight. It honestly is a vigorous exchange of ideas and more cooperation than we tend to get credit for. And Madam Secretary, it's a particular pleasure for me to have you here today. I've known you for a long time, long before either of us were in our respective capacities, and I'll leave it to you to describe your public philosophy. But there's two things I know about you, your public education philosophy. But one is that you've always been for individualizing education. You've always been for what's the right job, role, or place for this particular student to be. And I see a lot of that in your proposals. And two, you've never been afraid to put a bold idea on the table and advance it. And I see a lot of that in this budget as well. There's a lot of boldness here, some of which I agree with, some of which, quite frankly, I don't. But that doesn't bother me. I like the idea that you're willing to break the mold and think about this, because we've got a lot of challenges. And we also, you're our chief officer overseeing probably the most diverse educational system in the world. I just think about my own districts. I've got 5 colleges and universities, everything from, great comprehensive state institutions to elite liberal arts institutions to regional facilities to private Christian colleges. I've got, like everybody else, most of the young people that I'm privileged to represent and their families go to public schools, but I've got charter schools, I've got private religious schools, I've got home schools, and they all do a good job. They all wrestle with the same problems, and I've got one of the most robust career tech systems any place in the country throughout Oklahoma, and certainly in my district, and I was particularly pleased with a number of proposals that you made in that regard. So I think we'll have a great discussion today. I'm looking forward to your testimony, and as a former educator, I understand how important it is for our entire population to have access to quality education. Without question, education is one of our most important building blocks for success, and access to quality learning directly impacts lifelong development and unlocks each individual's potential. I was pleased to see that your budget request continues to prioritize resources to certain populations of children who need additional support, including children with special needs and disabilities, and Indian education and school districts whose revenues are impacted by federal presence within their boundaries. As you know, I'm a strong supporter of career and technical education, and I'm proud that my home state of Oklahoma is leading the way in innovative models for delivering cutting-edge skills that can lead to good-paying, rewarding careers for students who do not wish to pursue a 4-year liberal arts degree. And I thank you for your support of these programs, and I'm looking forward to asking you more questions about the substantial increases in your budget that your budget proposes for these programs this year. I also want to recognize your proposal to expand Pell Grants to students enrolled in short-term programs that offer a credential in a high-demand field. These opportunities offer high-payment employment in a variety of fields needed throughout my district as well as many others. Interesting to me how many times we've had, when we do member testimony, members come here and specifically push the need for career and technical education, both in terms of job opportunities and talking to their employers in terms of needed skills. So I think you've really focused on a key area here. I've spoken, again, to small business owners, other members of Congress who believe it's time to make Pell Grants available to individuals for enrollment in certificate-based programs. I applaud you for putting that on the table for us to consider. Madam Secretary, your budget once again proposes to eliminate, consolidate, or change over 24 programs. Some of these proposals may make sense in the context of a reauthorization or consolidation. I believe others are short-sighted. I actually agree with my friend, the chairman. I'm particularly concerned about the proposal to move the successful TRIO program from a competitive grant model to the formula grant for states. That's no surprise to you. That's been a position I've held throughout my career. I'm also concerned about the proposal to consolidate several minority-serving institutions' funding into a single stream. As you know, these institutions serve distinct populations with different needs, and I'm not certain that such a change makes sense. Moreover, I feel that these often disadvantaged minority populations may be overlooked or marginalized in a, if they're not singled out for special attention. So I'm interested in hearing your perspective on that. I also would like to acknowledge your proposal to address limitations in the student aid program. Establishing federal student aid as a separate organization is an issue I think is worth thinking about. I'm not sure we're the right people to consider it here. It really is much more of an authorizing function than we're probably equipped to handle on this committee. But I do support your efforts to streamline and create a more user-focused system for student borrowers. The Next Generation project promises to modernize and improve the student loan infrastructure, benefiting over 40 million customers. Finally, while I tend to support block grants to states and freeing school districts from the bureaucracy involved with administering dozens of small, separate federal programs, I do have some concerns that consolidating some programs, such as the charter school program, could have a negative consequence for the very students we hope to benefit by these proposals. And I'll have a few questions about that. Again, there's a risk here that some states are welcoming the charter schools, others, quite frankly, are not. And so I worry a little bit about, the public sector taking money that we want to try and seed these innovative things. And I know you probably know more about this than anybody on this panel. You've got a lot of experience here, so I'm interested in your perspectives on that. I know you faced a very difficult challenge in making all the pieces fit into a tight budget. I made this point with Secretary Azar yesterday. This isn't necessarily your budget. This is the OMB's budget that you're tasked to defend, and that's what you're supposed to do. You work for the President of the United States. That's the budget process here. But obviously, you had to wrestle with a much smaller budget than you might have otherwise chosen. I'm not going to ask you about that. I would expect you to be, of course, supportive of the President's position on this and overall budget priorities. But I think that does put you, just as it did Secretary Azar, in a difficult position. Sometimes you may well have been forced to make cuts that you did not advocate. We had a rather famous incident of that last year on Special Olympics, as I recall. I know you sometimes privately make an argument that we might agree with up here, but publicly you got to go, make the case. So again, I respect that. That's one of the obligations you undertake when you accept a position as you have. That, by the way, great personal sacrifice is not exactly the job you need, and I admire you, quite frankly, for your commitment to public service. I know that under the leadership of our chairman, the gentlelady from Connecticut, a strong quality education for students across the country will remain a fundamental priority in the creation of this year's labor HHS bill, just as it was last year, frankly, just as it was when I was privileged to be chairman. And my friend has always been a good partner in that endeavor, whichever role she has, chairman or chair of the committee or ranking member. So I look forward to working with my friend once again to craft a budget that balances our many priorities and invests in our country's people and its future. I look forward to your testimony today, Madam Chairman, and I yield back the balance of my time. Or Madam Secretary, and I yield back to you, the Chair.
I thank my friend, the ranking member, and again, look forward to working with you on this, and we will put it together as we have in the past. And now I'd like to turn to the distinguished chair of the full committee for any comments that she may have. Congresswoman Nita Lowey of New York.
Good morning, and thank you, Madam Secretary, for appearing before the committee. I look forward to the exchange of ideas. And I want to thank Chairwoman DeLauro and Ranking Member Cole for holding this hearing. This is the fourth budget request Congress has received for the Department of Education under your leadership that has been filled with program cuts and outright eliminations. Without fail, your vision hurts our students and their families. Like every previous year, we are going to reject this proposal. You'd like us to believe this proposal empowers states and districts with flexibility, but the numbers don't lie. You propose eliminating 41 programs, cutting education funding overall by billion. The Department of Education's mission is to promote student achievement and preparation for global competitiveness by fostering educational excellence and ensuring equal access. Secretary DeVos, your budget is clearly on a different mission, one that shirks accountability to our students and taxpayers. It would take more than my allotted time to read the complete list of eliminations and funding cuts, so I will only highlight a few, all of which demonstrate a lack of commitment to educational equity across elementary, secondary, and post-secondary education. Where we should be protecting and building on our $16.3 billion investment in Title I schools, your budget proposal has eliminated this crucial support for students in high-poverty schools. You propose eliminating full-service community schools in my district. The Thomas Edison Elementary School in Portchester was among the first in the country to implement the full-service community school model, and their success has showed that integrating academics, social services, community engagement improves student learning, strengthens families, and empowers communities. I must admit I was an author at that time. I have visited this school, and it's so exciting to see these youngsters get all that they need within the school itself, because many of these parents are working 2 jobs, and to have it all there, to have the parents come in and be a part of it is very, very exciting. So I must admit it was disappointing for me to see this program eliminated. Now, we'll put it back, but it's still disappointing because I know of your interest in educating all the kids. The budget request eliminates the English Language Acquisition Grant Program, which is vital for combating inequality by improving outcomes for English language learners. Working families count on after-school programs so that they can go to work knowing their child is safe and learning, but your budget request eliminates this funding too. More than half of Americans live in a child care desert, and that includes the 1 in 5 college students who are parents. On-campus child care programs like the Virginia Marks Children Center at Westchester Community College help student parents successfully pursue degrees, but you would cut funding for the Child Care Access Means Parents in School, the C-Campus program, by nearly 72%. I'm trying not to elaborate and getting to the point, but 72% is a lot of parents and children who won't be able to access this opportunity. It would be absurd to champion this budget request for its so-called fiscal responsibility. More than $2 billion in student financial aid and grants to institutions would be cut and instead squandered on a border wall. By eliminating programs and reducing funds, this budget request would exacerbate the opportunity gap. Our students deserve better, and I sincerely hope your response to our questions will address these concerns. And I thank you again for appearing before us.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. We will now turn to you for your testimony, and your full testimony, as you know, will be made into the record. And I'll ask you to take the 5-minute time to summarize so that we can get to everyone's questions. And after that, we will proceed to 5-minute rounds for questions. And in that effort, I recognize members in order of seniority and appearance at the time when we put the gavel down. So, Madam Secretary, please begin when you're ready.
Thank you. Chairwoman DeLauro, Ranking Member Cole, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on the President's fiscal year 2021 budget. While we're discussing a budget, it's important to remember that federal government spending does not determine everything that's important to us, nor is it the only solution when we encounter challenges and opportunities. Instead, we the people overcome challenges and seize opportunities. That's why this department's budget is focused on returning power to the people, to those closest to students and to students themselves. Our budget begins by recognizing that education is a local issue. Congress recognized that truth when it created the U.S. Department of Education 40 years ago. It promised the move would, and I quote, not increase the authority of the federal government over education, nor diminish the responsibility for education, which is reserved to the states, end quote. This administration proposes Congress align the budget with that 40-year-old promise. Our budget would take a big step toward right-sizing the federal role in education so that families, teachers, and state and local leaders are free to do what's right for students. The budget would expand education freedom for students so that they can prepare for successful careers. And it would refocus our approach to higher education so that students are at the center of everything we do. First, let's consider recent history. Over 40 years, federal taxpayers have spent more than $1 trillion trying to fix K-12 education. Each year, Congress grew the budget from nearly $7 billion in 1980 to more than $41 billion in 2020 for K-12 education alone. But what have we bought with all that spending? Just open up the latest Nation's Report Card to see the sad results. No real improvement in student achievement in decades. So instead of holding fast to what we know does not work, let me suggest we find the courage to do something bold and begin a new era of student growth and achievement. The Every Student Succeeds Act gives us good insights into where we should go. ESSA became law because many of you on both sides of the aisle realized federal overreach in education had failed. So you moved to restore the proper roles in education. The bipartisan K-12 law affords states and communities more flexibility to address local challenges. This administration proposes Congress complement its work on ESSA and make the budget match the law. States must work with local communities and families to develop comprehensive plans that best meet the needs of their students. And so states should be able to target their federal taxpayer dollars accordingly. To that end, we propose putting an end to education earmarks by consolidating nearly all federal K-12 programs into one single block grant. Overall, Americans spend about $860 billion on K-12 education every year. Last year, Congress appropriated about $24 billion of that through the programs in our proposed block grant, or roughly 2.5% of total education spending. And yet, each year, teachers and school leaders spend more than 2 million hours complying with federal reporting and record-keeping requirements for that small slice of the pie. 2 million hours, more than 83,000 days, more than 225 years. That's time that could have been focused on helping students learn and grow. Teachers, administrators, and state leaders need to be free to focus on people, not paperwork. Results, not regulations. Different states will invest their share of the block grant differently, and that's okay. In fact, that's what we hope they do. They can better figure out what their students need because they know their students. Every student is unique, and each one of them learns differently. Every child needs the freedom to learn in places and in ways that work for them. That's why the President's 2021 budget also renews its call for a historic investment in America's students, Education Freedom Scholarships. Our proposal is a dollar-for-dollar federal income tax credit for voluntary contributions to state-based, nonprofit organizations that provide scholarships directly to students. I like to picture kids with backpacks representing funding for their education following them wherever they go to learn. The budget also requests a $100 million increase in supporting children with disabilities, amounting to a total of $14 billion for IDEA programs. There's also a request for a dramatic expansion of career and technical education programs. At an overall increase of nearly $900 million, it's the largest investment in CTE ever. It includes a total of $2 billion for Perkins State grants, which is an increase of nearly $800 million. Additionally, we're requesting $150 million, an increase of more than $135 million, to fund STEM activities led by HBCUs and other minority-serving institutions located in opportunity zones. This administration wants every student in America to have more education options that focus on preparing them for successful careers. That goes hand in hand with our groundbreaking initiatives at federal student aid. Consider that FSA is essentially a $1.5 trillion bank that's dramatically outgrown its governance structure. We propose evaluating a new governance structure and whether FSA should be a standalone entity. In the meantime, we're continuing to build on our important reforms that establish one platform, one operating system, one website, and importantly, on providing customers, students and their families, with a seamless student loan experience. In the end, our budget is about one thing: putting students and their needs above all else. It's a budget that recognizes that no student and no state, no teacher and no town are the same. States need to be free to address the particular problems and possibilities of their people, and students of all ages need the freedom to find their fit. This budget proposes that Congress give it to them. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'm happy to respond to your questions.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary. And I'm sorry I was remiss in recognizing Larry Keene, who is the Budget Services Director at Department of Ed. So welcome to you as well, Mr. Keene. Madam Secretary, to justify your cuts, you repeatedly claim additional funding for our public schools does not improve student outcomes. A claim that has no basis in reality. 2018 review of recent research on education spending, student outcomes by Northwestern economist Carabo Jackson found statistically significant positive results for students in 12 out of 13 study, which is why Dr. Jackson concludes, by and large, the question of whether money matters is essentially settled. I don't understand, Madam Secretary, why do you continue to claim that additional resources to public schools do not improve student outcomes when the empirical evidence tells us the exact opposite? I'm just going to, I admittedly have not read through all of them. I have read some of them, but this is by education experts, people who understand the science of learning and development and how it improves. The data is overwhelming. So I ask you again, how can you continue to make these claims that student outcomes do not improve when empirical evidence tells us the opposite?
Chairwoman, let me just refer back to the NAEP results. But before I do that, there's a couple of things that you said in your opening comments that I need to comment to. First of all, I'm not out to privatize anything about education. I'm out to make sure every student's education is personalized, individualized for them, that they find the right fit to unlock their potential. So let's talk about personalization, not about privatization. That's not the issue. That's not the goal. And we have spent over $1 trillion at the federal level to close the achievement gap in the last 40 years. That achievement gap has not closed one little bit.
Well, that's
in
not
fact,
true.
for many poor students, it's only grown wider. You look at the state-by-state results, you look at the overall results, and they are dismal.
I'm gonna
2 out of
name
3
4
eighth graders
Secretary.
cannot read or do math at their grade level.
And I would want to know where those schools are, what the environmental circumstances are, what kind of resources are going into those schools to the training of teachers and improving the lives of the families who live there and making sure that the youngsters have that experience and the trained people that they need. If you deny the resources to the schools that need the help most, yes, you will fail. I'm going to tell you.
No, if you
NAEP
free,
scores in
actually, if you
math.
free up the resources for people at the most local level, you see results.
Well,
You
I'll
can
tell
see
you-
it in Florida, you can see
Yeah.
it in Mississippi, where they focused solely on
And
improving
you can
reading
see in
outcomes.
the District of Columbia where the data from this administration has demonstrated that that's not the case. And, we've got scores higher in 2019 for most racial ethnic groups in both subjects, and at both grades compared to the early 1990s. This is the NAEP data. Scores in math and reading are significantly higher than they were 40 years ago for all racial and ethnic groups. So the fundamental principle and the underlying philosophy on which you move forward and cutting all these programs and move to a $5 billion for vouchers flies in the face of the progress that's made. Let us work together to understand the statistics, realize that where we are, know that there is a difference, and we've got somewhere to go on an achievement gap, but let's not denigrate a public school system that serves 90% of our kids and that is making gains. Let us continue to make those gains. And quite frankly, the cuts that you have proposed is doublespeak. It is doublespeak. So I'm just going back to your words that are the NAEP study. You got, and as I said, you got more studies released in 2019 reached the same conclusions, including a study showing how extra money for Texas schools had a particularly strong impact on low-income and Hispanic students. I'm going to share the studies with yourself and with your staff and with the members of this subcommittee to take a look to see if, in fact, the data belies the direction that you are taking public education in this country. And my time has run out. Let me yield to my colleague from.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. As I said in my comments, Madam Secretary, I'm really excited about your Pell Grant proposal and your additional investment in career and technical education. So I've got a couple of questions along those lines. What you actually say that we would give these grants to provide credentials in, quote, in-demand fields. So I guess I'm sort of interested to know how would you define in demand? What would actually be covered? How would that work? Would all the programs that let's say a duly recognized state career and technical, would that be covered, or do you have some sort of selectivity in mind?
Well, our proposal really seeks to work with Congress to determine what the definition around those programs and the extent to which they would be a part of a short-term Pell program. I know it varies by region, and I think it would behoove all of us to work closely with regions and states and to look at what those opportunities are. But we would look forward to working with Congress to determine that and to really address these opportunities for students.
Well, I actually find, certainly in my state, honestly, quite often young people, or not so young, because obviously you can be any age, come in for additional technical training. They literally end up with a job faster, usually, than somebody coming out of a four-year education, and it's quite often a very high-paying job. Believe me, when you need a plumber, you really need a plumber. You can't wait around. And
right.
So I applaud that. We get a lot of questions about this because a lot of the students that go to these facilities are comparatively low income, and frankly, just the cost of college or the idea of assuming the debt that's often associated with that to them doesn't make sense. This really does. So I'm glad you put it on the table. I'm going to go to an area where, frankly, we don't agree, and that's on the TRIO and Gear Up proposals that you have. I've got a lot of TRIO students in my state. We've historically been one of those states that's really benefited from that. We've really benefited from Gear Up. And frankly, I've never met a single student or instructor in these programs that didn't think they were worthwhile. I look at TRIO, for instance, and since its inception, it's produced over 5 million college graduates. And I think a lot of those young people, quite honestly, would not have had the opportunity or the support structure to succeed in college without TRIO or the preparation that's necessary. That's one of the great things about Gear Up. A lot of families that where nobody's gone to college before really are not in a very good position sometimes to counsel their own kids or prepare them. And I don't want to send them to a college and not have them successful. I want them to get that degree, not walk out of there with a few hours and thousands of dollars worth of debt. So these programs, to me, seem to do that. And I used to have this problem, quite frankly, with the last administration, which I thought underinvested in these programs, even though historically, in fact, we were always doing race to the top or some, new deal when we had a couple of programs here, I think, have demonstrated their utility over time, again and again. So explain to me again the advantages you would see in the consolidation and the movement to formula grants as opposed to competitive grants in this area.
Well, thank you, and I totally agree that these programs are beneficial and effective for many students, and our proposal does seek to essentially move Gear Up into the TRIO program and block grant it to the states. The reality is that most of the awardees for the TRIO program are consistent year after year after year, and it's very difficult for any new program to break into it. We think that by allowing more flexibility.
We should put more money in TRIO.
Well, and that's certainly your prerogative, but I think coupled with our proposal to block grant the elementary and secondary education funding, the 29 different programs, and again, provide a lot more flexibility at the state and local level. The answer for one district might look quite different than an answer for the other district.
That's a fair point.
And I think coupled, it could be a really powerful.
Fair point. I've only got about 30 seconds left, so let me just quickly ask one other area, because I know you've historically been a great champion of charter schools. And I do worry, not everybody shares that point of view. And, I think if you block grant these to states, a lot of the money that's been set aside specifically for charters, honestly, is apt to be diverted into the public system, particularly, even though, to the normal, K through 12 system, particularly when, the overall amount of money is coming down. The deal, well, let's concentrate within the K through 12 system. These are more experimental, or these are a little bit more outside the quote-unquote mainstream. So I've gone over my time, but just briefly, do you have that concern?
Well, let me be very clear. I totally support charter schools and think we need not fewer of them, we need many more of them. There are a million families on the wait list for charter schools across the country. And I actually view our consolidation and block grant proposal as one that is additive and positive for charters. I've talked with a number of governors about the block grant concept, and they're very excited about it. In states where they embrace this, there's going to be dramatic expansion.
I've gone over my time, so I don't want the chairwoman to have to interrupt me. I'll interrupt myself. But thank you, and I'd like to continue this discussion with you. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the indulgence.
Congresswoman Lee.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Secretary. Let me go right to this, because there's still, and this is increasing, in terms of systemic injustices toward our Black and Latino students. First of all, you eliminated the 2014 school discipline guidance to help ensure that students of color are not subject to harsher discipline practices than their white peers. Now, let me ask you about your Office for Civil Rights proposal. Now, this is a double whammy, to combine the counts of preschool children who received out-of-school suspension with those who received more than one out-of-school suspension, and your proposal to eliminate preschool enrollment data by race and ethnicity. Now, without this distinction, it's going to be very difficult to understand whether and to what extent this trend persists. The ability to track this data, it's critical, because while Black students, now you got to hear this and understand this and why this is so important. Black students make up 20% of preschool children. Now, these are babies, right? They represent 50% of suspended, again, babies, preschoolers. Don't forget also that the Education Department's, your own data in 2013 and 2014 found that Black preschoolers, again, babies, are 3 times more likely to receive one or more out-of-school suspension than their white counterparts. So I've requested in the last 2 years that this subcommittee receive language detailing school discipline in all preschool and K through 12 classrooms, and to also include it in your 2020 budget justification. here you are again without having submitted this data. We went through this last year. Although your budget request says that you will brief us on your plan with a horrendous plan to significantly alter this data collection. So why do you plan to change the data collection so that it really, and that's what it's going to do, it's going to mask the trends for out-of-school suspensions of preschoolers. And we should have solved this, and we shouldn't have to ask you once again for this data. So that's my first question. What in the world is going on and taking so long for us to get this report that we required you to submit for the last few years? And also, do you believe that black students are punished and suspended at greater rates than their white peers? Yes or no? I mean, do you believe that? The data shows this, and these are children. These are babies.
Ma'am, I agree and love children as you do and want to ensure that all children have the opportunity to get a great education. We have been focused on answering and responding to all of your requests.
But you haven't done that.
We'll check on that specific
But you
report.
said that last year, Madam Secretary.
And what I know and what I am committed to is ensuring that all kids have an opportunity
I
and
understand that.
equal
Madam Secretary, you
access
tell
to
us that every year, but what about black and Latino kids? You don't even submit
that
to
is
us.
exactly
no,
my
no,
point
Madam
with-
Secretary,
with,
no.
opportunities for
You're trying to mask
personalizing
this
their
by saying you're now
education.
not going to collect the data by race. So how in the world are you going to be able to say that you care about black and Latino kids? The other report we asked you detailing the recommendations with regard to how to address adverse impacts of resegregation, including designating Title VI school monitors to ensure that every student has the opportunity for an equal education. Again, you said you were aware of this report, you'd get it back to us as soon as possible. We still don't have this report. We've tried and tried over and over again, Madam Secretary, to get these reports from your office. They're written into the bills, they're required, and you're just thumbing your finger at us.
That is not the case.
Well, it is the case,
We are
'cause you-
responsive. We have continued to be responsive to
Well,
the
where?
many requests from Congress, and we are committed
Madam
to
Secretary,
doing.
on black and Latino kids, these babies, these preschoolers, you have not been responsive. These are children who don't even get a head start because they're kicked out of school before they're even in kindergarten. Don't you think that's important?
I think each one of them is important, and I care about each one of their futures. That's
Well, Madam-
why I'm suggesting we do things very
Now,
differently
Madam
than what
Secretary,
we've been doing.
This committee has asked you for this data. And instead of providing the data and the reports, you're now trying to mask it by saying you're not going to use race and ethnicity to even present the facts. So how can you sit there and say that? We ask you over and over and over again every year.
I am committed to each of those children as you are.
But you're not showing that. Could you
A
submit?
report,
wait a minute. Let me ask you about.
does not solve.
No,
A report does not
but
solve
we're
a child's
asking.
problem.
But wait a minute. We're asking.
A report
you,
is not a child's
Madam Secretary,
future.
we're asking you for the report. We need the data to understand this. I would think you'd want the data to understand it also. That's all we're asking for. This is basic. So why wouldn't we get the information that this committee has asked you for 2 years about preschoolers being disproportionately suspended from preschool? These babies, these black babies.
Let's talk about the lack of achievement.
When are we going to get the report?
Let's talk about the lack of achievement
So-
and the lack of opportunity.
So we can't
by
ask you
being
for these
forced to
reports,
go-
Madam Secretary?
By being forced to
I
go
want
to
to know
schools
when we're
that
going to
don't
get
work
the
for them.
Madam Secretary, are you just saying forget the reports? Just tell us that if you're not going to give
No,
it to us.
ma'am, I'm not.
Well, then when do we get it?
I will check on when that report will be available.
Both reports on school resegregation and the suspension and expulsion of black and Latino kids. You told us this last year. A year has gone by, and it's outrageous.
Congressman Harris.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Secretary. What's outrageous is that 25% of our children, of our 8th graders, can't read a grade level passage. That's what's outrageous. And you're right, money doesn't solve this problem. You know, I had the privilege of being invited to the 15th anniversary of the OSP program at Department of Education, where we met the parents. All they wanted was a better life, a better schooling for their children. And Madam Secretary, you know that 90% of those students who took advantage of that program are black students.
That's right.
The vast majority of the rest are Latino students. So to somehow suggest that you as an advocate for programs like that don't care about Black and Latino students just doesn't jive with the data.
That's right.
Let's talk about the data. Significant progress on NAEP. Really? U.S. News and World Report headline about the last scores say, across the board, comma, scores drop in math and reading for U.S. students. They dropped. They didn't go up. There was no significant improvement. And with regards to the disparity, it's pretty clear the disparity has existed between the highest and lowest performers for 30 years consistently. Now, there's some people who would suggest that repeating the same thing you're doing that doesn't work is insanity. That's exactly what we're doing in the United States. So I'm going to congratulate you on the suggestion for the Education Freedom Scholarships. Now, I know it's a bold idea to somehow believe that you should put parents in charge of their children's education or maybe making the choice where to send their children to school because, of course, God knows we know better. That somehow some bureaucrat somewhere knows better. Some academic sitting in some ivory tower knows better than the mother. Some of those mothers I saw at that Department of Education celebration who really knew what was better for their children. It was not to be sent to the same poorly performing public schools because there was no competition. Now, let me tell you what's interesting from the NAEP scores. There was one jurisdiction in the country where actually the students performed better on 3 out of 4 of the measurements, Washington, D.C. Because for 13 years before that test was taken, Washington, D.C. instituted competition for a failing public school system. And the academics go, oh, no, it doesn't. Oh, no, we're going to compare the scores of the people who went to the voucher schools and people who didn't go to the voucher schools. Competition works, and the Education Freedom Scholarships will induce competition. Now, let me ask you, does a dollar from for those scholarships come from the Department of Education budget? I think I saw it was the Department of Treasury budget, wasn't it? Where those dollars?
For Education Freedom Scholarships,
yes,
it's
right.
part of the Department of Treasury budget.
Right. So this wouldn't really take a dollar.
No.
In our public schools,
No,
would it?
it would be voluntary contributions.
So let me see. So what could the possible opposition to voluntary contributions to a program, and I think I have the facts right, about 3/4 of parents favor that idea, the idea of actually giving choice. In fact, the statistics I see, 68% of African-American parents, 82% of Latino parents, specifically about the EFS program, 83% of African-American parents, 83% of Latino parents actually want that choice.
That's right.
Why in the world would we deny it? Can you come up with any reason why, other than teacher union opposition, could you come up with any other reason why we would deny that?
I see no reason to deny these kids that opportunity.
Madam Secretary, thank you for putting up with what you do, what you put up with, to stand up for the idea that every child, and as an educator for the 30 years before I came to Congress, for the idea that every child in America and every parent in America deserve a choice of where to get sent to school. And if they are unfortunate enough to live in a geographic area or a school district where their school is just plain lousy, that they should have the opportunity to go to a charter school, and it can be a public charter school, it could be a non-public charter school, a charter school, or get a voucher, especially under the Education Freedoms. These are voluntary contributions to get a voucher to help those children go to a better school. I just don't understand the argument against it. I never will understand the argument against it. It's about time we get raw politics out of education because it's standing in the way. Because, you know, if you look at the statistics, yeah, there was improvement in the NAEP. We went from 31st to 30th in the world in the last NAEP. 31st to 30th in the world wasn't math or reading, I guess it was science. That's pathetic. In the 21st century, we can't afford to be anything but first in the world, and I just want to congratulate you on what you do to see to it that that could happen. I yield back.
Thank you, Congressman.
Congressman Pocan.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Secretary. Easiest question you'll get today. We have something in common, 5-letter last name that gets mispronounced a lot. Is it DeVos or DeVos?
It's generally DeVos, but I've heard it lots of
No
different
problem.
ways.
My name too, so I appreciate it. So Secretary DeVos, thank you for being here, and I want to thank you first for not having cuts this year to special education and not cutting the Special Olympics. The fourth time's the charm, and I just want to say thank you. And also, happy Public Schools Week. I'm sure you're around the country advocating for public schools this week. Thank you. We had a strong bipartisan resolution with 90 people, including our ranking member on that, and very proud of the public schools we have in this country. I do want to pick up on where our ranking member started talking about charter schools, though, because this is where I think we don't have as good information. First of all, on academic performance, we know on charter schools about 1 out of 6 does better than public schools, about half are about the same, but 2 out of 6 perform worse than public schools on academic performance. But I think there's something even worse. You mentioned what we bought with this spending. When you look at charter schools, there was a report last year that said 1,000 charter school program grants were given out by the Department of Education, were given to schools that never opened or later closed because of mismanagement, poor performance, or fraud. And then another report just last December said it's actually worse than that. It was 2,127 schools out of 5,286 that actually never opened or failed. That's 40.5% failure rate on charter schools. I looked it up. That's an F grade when you're below 60%. And yet you're advocating for doing more Fs rather than more As like we get with public schools, or Bs in some cases, and maybe a few Cs. But Fs certainly don't seem to be the grade we want to advocate for. Also, there was a school, the IDEA charter chain, that have been awarded about $200 million in federal funds. Over the years, they got a $67 million grant, another $116 million. Yet, this is some of what they've spent their money on. They had $400,000 going to a luxury box and tickets for Spurs tickets. I don't think you'd see public schools getting a luxury box. They purchased a property from one of their board members for $1.7 million. I don't think a school board member would sell their property to a public school. Another board member got the commission on that sale on over millions of dollars of property, and only after a lot of scrutiny did the CEO back off of a plan to lease a private jet for $2 million a year over 6 years. So I guess my question on this terrible failure rate we have with charter schools that you're still advocating for, just a yes or no, do you think charter schools who receive federal funding should be allowed to use those funds to purchase private jets?
Well, Congressman,
yes or no
I'm not,
question.
no, it's not a yes or no question. It's
Well,
not
yeah,
a yes
actually
or
it
no
is.
answer.
Actually, it really is. It's the definition
Actually,
of a yes or
I
no
have a
question.
few things to say about the things that
Okay,
you
but-
said about
but
charter schools.
Can you answer my question, please, Secretary? Do you
I
think
have a few
federal
things to
funds-
say about what you said
Okay,
about charter
reclaiming
schools.
my time, Madam Secretary.
The
Reclaiming my
report-
time.
no,
It's
I'm
a yes
sorry.
or no question I'm
The
giving you.
report that you referenced has
I
been
didn't ask
totally
you about the
debunked as
report.
propaganda. Fewer than 2%
Madam
of the
Secretary,
schools
reclaiming my time.
didn't open.
I gave you the courtesy of making sure I could even say your name correct. Give me the courtesy of answering my
I
question.
appreciate that,
A
but
yes
if you're
or no
asking me a question, I need to have a chance
but I'm
to
answering
answer.
you a question with a yes or no answer. It's really that simple. If the Secretary of Education can't answer a yes or no question, I don't know why you can be the Secretary. Do you think federal funding should go to a school that uses it to buy a private jet? That's a yes or no question.
It's a very hypothetical question
Oh my
that is
God.
a
No, it's an
obviously a
actual
no
question.
no
It's an
answer.
actual
There is
question.
no
It's-
funding going to charter schools that would even address something
You think,
like that.
another yes or
Let-
no, that they should
no,
be able to put money
let
to
me
a
just
box
say,
at a professional
charter schools are
order?
public schools.
Madam Secretary, reclaiming my
Charter
time.
schools are
Reclaiming my
doing
time.
a great job for the
Reclaiming
families that
my
are
time.
choosing them, and there are a million
Madam
families
Secretary.
on the wait list to
Madam
go to
Secretary,
charter
just
schools.
talking over someone isn't an answer, just so you know. And yes or no often is when it's asked in a yes or no format. We also know that on the same group gave such incomplete information over 3 years, didn't report accurate information, reported no information on performance data. Would you give your staff a paycheck if they didn't perform 84% of their tasks? Yes or no?
Of course not, but
Thank you for
everything
answering it
you're
in a yes or
citing,
no. That's
everything
progress.
you're citing is debunked ridiculous. So
No,
I
it's-
don't accept the
it's
premise
actually-
of your
it's
your
actually-
question.
Well, it's actually not. Let me ask you this. Do you think it's odd when people think your family runs a charter, correct? That's a yes or no.
No,
Your husband doesn't have a charter program?
he founded a charter
You
school.
founded a charter. So when people think that you may have a conflict of interest because of that, what do you?
Absolutely not.
I'll let you not do a yes or no. You can respond however on that.
I will respond in that my husband founded a charter school which is meeting needs of students all over West Michigan. And he is on the board, but he does not run the school. It is organized as a not-for-profit charter school, and it is a public school serving all comers.
Madam Secretary, I think just the fact that you couldn't answer yes or no when you look at this terrible rating of charter schools, this is why people have a worry that there could be a conflict or something else.
You're
because
wrong
if
about
they're not
charter
performing
schools.
academically, yeah, but if 40% are closing down that you're giving grants to,
That is
that's a
not
waste of
true.
public
That has been a
resources.
totally debunked report. It was nothing but propaganda by an individual who has an in for charter schools.
So what percent of charter schools are failing? Do you have an idea? A number?
I
Any
don't
number?
have a state,
You're the Secretary of
national.
Education and you don't have this? You know this report's wrong,
Charter
but you
schools
don't
are
have a number.
chartered by states.
Yeah,
They
but-
are not chartered by the federal
You know
government.
that number's not right, but you don't have a correct number. Is that what you're telling
What
me?
I know is parents and families
So you
are
don't know.
choosing to
So you
send their
don't know the
children to
answer.
charter schools.
That's a yes or no, so you don't know the answer.
Parents and children
It's a yes or
are
no, so
going
you
to
don't
charter
know the
schools by
answer.
choice, and
I
there
think
are
I
a
have the
million
answer.
more
I think I
families
have
on
the
charter
answer.
school
Thank
wait
you.
lists.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do want to say that I'm very troubled by the tone of this hearing, and I feel like our secretary is being badgered, and I would ask the chair to consider that as we move forward, because I feel it's very unfortunate that we've come here to help meet the needs of our children, the nation's children, and I think the tone of this hearing is very disappointing in that regard. And I also want to say, as a person who's familiar with the Secretary's record, I don't know of a single person who has been more engaged in policies to help minority students across the country than this Secretary from all of her work throughout her career. So I'm very disappointed right now, but I do want to talk about some of the priorities. And also, as someone who's been a former school administrator, a charter school administrator, and someone who chaired a state education budget, I will say that the focus that you have on helping people closest to the student and who care most for the student making decisions, to me, is the right direction. So I want to compliment you on that. I know there are a lot of issues we could discuss, but I just want to say that at the outset. There's a few specific things I wanted to ask you to talk about. First, the Second Chance Pell. I think one of the high points of Congress working with the administration has been to look at prison reform and to help those who have been in prison come back into the community and contribute. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about your plans going forward. I know there's interest in community colleges in my area and participating in this, but if you could talk briefly about the Second Chance Pell Program.
Well, thank you, Congressman, and I think this is an area where there is actually broad spread support and a lot of great evidence. I've had opportunity to visit 3 different prisons and see students that have. I visited Tulsa Community College in prison in Oklahoma last summer, and it was just thrilled to see all of these mostly young men graduating with associate's degrees, with certificate program recognition, some of them completing their high school requirements, but it was a thrill to be there, and I think there's so much promise with making a Second Chance Pell Program a permanent one that is going to provide hope and opportunity for returning incarcerated individuals and give them a really hopeful future.
Wonderful, thank you. And then I also wanted to talk with you. You mentioned preparing students for successful careers, and I know the federal work study proposals that you have really are aimed at inviting the private sector to participate more, and I understand there's 190 institutions that would be invited to participate in a pilot program. I know in one of my areas, Mid-Michigan College is interested in participating in that. Could you comment on that briefly?
Well, we think that there's a real opportunity to help students get much more relevant work experience while they're attending college and in a federal work study program. instead of, working in the college cafeteria, if they are doing student teaching perhaps, or clinicals in a health profession, or perhaps it's in a business that has a relevance with the program they're taking in their college, we think extending this opportunity and helping students get really relevant, almost apprenticeship-like experience while they're in school studying is an important step in the direction of helping students succeed.
Thank you. Also, I think as parents, everyone's concerned about the higher cost of college education. When you see the debt that students are taking out, and then just the burden that places on them in the future, can you comment about just what the administration can do to help alleviate the high cost of education, but also the student loan debt?
Well, this is a huge issue, and I'm not sure I've got enough time to answer it fully, but I'll start with a couple of things. We have taken important steps administratively to add a lot of light to what students can access through the college scorecard. And now students can go to look up an institution and then go down to the field of study or program, find out what it's going to cost to attend that program and complete, and then importantly, what their first year earning potential is after that. They can compare between schools, they can compare programs within schools, and this is going to, I think, help them be more discerning prospectively. I also think it's going to help schools look more critically at what they're offering and what the realities are of what they're offering. Perhaps it's going to make some changes, or prompt some changes at higher ed institutions, and that is one way, bringing light to what has been a very murky kind of a reality, and so that's one way we've taken a step. Another way, we've put the FAFSA form on the My Student Aid mobile app. We're continuing to add more and more information for students to model what their debt and what their student loan debt would mean, and how they could pay off and have real-time information for that right on their app. And we're going to be continuing to add more and more to give them more tools for financial literacy.
Thank you, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Let me just say, I beg the indulgence of this subcommittee, because I'd like to address, Congressman Molinar, your comments, if I can. And I have a great deal of respect for you and your work on this subcommittee. I think what you are hearing is a level of frustration about very, very important issues. And the two issues that have been addressed in a strong way, when we cannot get reports. We are an Appropriations Committee. We put in a bill that required the Department of Education to get us reports on the data with regard to babies being expelled from preschool. We don't have that report, nor was there an answer as to when we would get that report. That's a level of frustration. You would experience that as well. Further, with regard to charter schools, may I add that we held a hearing last year on charter schools. The OIG raised issues that we need to examine, including findings that states mismanaged charter school closures and that the department failed to provide adequate guidance or oversight on the issue. We are the Appropriations Committee. We have appropriated serious money, more than $400 million last year alone. We need to conduct oversight. And so there's a level of frustration, and I might add, when you can say about charter schools that God's in his heaven, all's right with the world, and you cannot do a serious evaluation of which ones work and which ones don't work, that means that the department is not doing the evaluation that we need to hear about. So wherein lies the frustration, Congressman Molinar? Sure, please.
Okay. No, and I completely respect that, and what I heard the secretary say is that she will find out the information on the report and get back to the committee, and I think any secretary deserves that courtesy to get. And on this charter school, I just would ask the chair to consider that charter schools, many have different missions. Some charter schools have the mission of educating adjudicated youth. And so the idea that we're going to start comparing high standard education with educating adjudicated youth and somehow evaluate them the same, that's a very different mission. And so I think this committee would be well served to kind of look at the unique missions of charter schools and where there are inappropriate.
I would also say to you that not our information, but the Office of the Inspector General at a public hearing that we had in this room last year claimed that there were serious difficulties. We have to look at that. We have to ask the department about that. So again, there's...
May I, Madam
Yes,
Chairman?
sure.
Because we're obviously a little off topic here, and thank you for the indulgence. Look, I have to speak up in defense of my member. I think Mr. Molinar was right to say what he said. The
I don't
tone
have
here
a
is wrong.
problem with that.
And I have zero problem, because I agree with my friend Ms. Lee. We asked for a report, we ought to get it. Nothing wrong with that. And we have some tough questions about charter school, nothing wrong with that. But anybody think the tone was appropriate toward a secretary? It was not. And that, we had a lot of people in 4 years that I came before this, when I was chairman of this committee, I didn't agree with in the other administration. I don't think I ever addressed anybody the way I heard the secretary addressed her, ever. And I don't think any of my members ever did.
Well,
so that, I think, is a legitimate point. And that's what I think the concern about, not the
As I say, that is a result of the frustration that people are feeling here. And quite frankly, to my friend, there have been members of your side of the aisle who have addressed folks who have come before this committee with a very big lack of respect. That doesn't say it's right, but what we want to do is to get through the frustration. We need to get answers. We are an appropriations committee. This is a serious amount of money that we are looking at, and there are deep concerns as to the direction of public education in this country. And
all I'll say is I agree. There are deep concerns. I respect the frustrations. They're real. That's part of legislating. But it's a little bit different in terms of how we treat our witnesses.
Well,
so thank you very much, Madam Chairman. I appreciate it.
and it applies to both sides of the aisle, as you know as well.
Certainly does on occasion.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Madam Secretary, for being here. I promise to apply a combination of Midwest nice and a little bit of my former investigative journalism background. But anyway, so interesting conversation. Thank you again for being here. So we are in the middle of a public health crisis, not just the coronavirus, but youth vaping. And my folks in education back home asked that I call it e-cigarettes because they think vaping makes it sound nicer than it is, so I will say e-cigarettes. But the numbers that we have from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention show that back in 2011, we had 1.5% of our high schoolers were doing e-cigarettes. Now, just last year, 2019, we're at 27.5%. So about a third of our high school students are now doing this. I mean, just alarming. That's why I call it an epidemic. At junior high and middle school, we are now at about 10.5% of our middle schoolers. So I just couldn't believe these numbers when I learned these. We did a series of roundtable discussions in my congressional district in downstate Illinois. And the one that really just alarmed me was that we had a school resource officer said that there was third graders that were doing this, third graders. And this is easy to hide. They can put it in watches, they can put it in clothing, they can do it on these fake jump drives. So they're doing this. And that's why we wrote a piece of legislation out of my office called the Resources to Prevent Youth Vaping. It is part of a package of bills that we'll be voting on the floor tomorrow. And so what I wanted to ask you, I promise I'm bringing this totally into your department. Wondering if the Department of Education is coordinating with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to make sure that we have information that we can get out to our parents, make sure that we have resources that the teachers know about, that the school nurses know about, and just wondering if there's any kind of coordination going on with your department and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Thanks, Congresswoman, for that question. I know that there have been participations in task forces. I'd be happy to check on the extent to which those are happening and get back with you on that.
Okay, yeah, if you could work with our office and make sure that we are aware of this. I think it's really just a commitment on your part. We were just with Secretary Azar yesterday, but I think working together will just be absolutely critical to help address this. Again, this is a public health epidemic that is impacting our students, our children. So I think that would be great. Switching gears. The other issue, I liked it, Lois Frankel was saying, I'm guessing you're going to ask something about Illinois, because I stay pretty focused on my own congressional district. Really, really severe teacher shortage that's happening all over the country. In the congressional district that I represent, we're 14 counties, and we have seen the teacher shortage problem actually increase over the last year. Actually increased by about 20% that we're seeing now. So in 2019, there were 195 teacher vacancies in these 14 counties that I represent. Now there are 235. That's just over the last year. So this problem is getting worse, not better. So I know in the president's budget, just a few things I want to point out for the record that are concerning to me. The Public Service Loan Forgiveness Fund has a proposed cut of $50 million. Teacher Quality Partnership Grant Program has a proposed cut of $50 million. The funding of the Supporting Effective Educator Development Grants, proposed cut of $80 million. Supporting Effective Instruction state grants cut of $2.1 billion.
Can I just interject, because a number of the programs that you've cited are actually the ones that we have proposed to include in the block grant, and would actually be very appropriate in your case and in your district. If there's a drastic shortage, the districts could target more of those resources and have the flexibility to use more of them for programs that would address the teacher shortage issue, teacher retention, teacher development, and in fact give them a lot more flexibility than the current scenario.
So talk me through then, if you could, in the 17 seconds we have left, talk me through about how specifically, so you've got the block grant proposal. This is a mostly rural district I represent, 7,000 square miles, again, a lot of smaller schools. How will these block grants help specifically recruit, retain, and fill all of these vacancies in a very, very rural congressional district?
Well, what it would do is allow for the districts to prioritize what portions of these 29 different programs would be most effective and most important for the needs in their district to meet the needs of the most disadvantaged students. And it would allow them, again, to personalize and prioritize where those needs lie more specifically than the approach of having 29 different programs, all with their own rules, all with their own regulations. These would be block granted to the state, and then 90% of them would go out directly to the districts under the Title I accountability and formulation. So all of the accountability provisions there, but much more flexibility for every district to be able to target the resources where they need them most.
I'll yield back the time that I don't have left. Thank you.
And a lady, Congresswoman Herrera Butler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Secretary, for being here. The first thing I wanted to mention, and we talked about this a little bit, I have a few questions, so I'm going to try and bang on through them. The practice of seclusion and restraint, we've talked about this before, of special ed students, I think is extremely detrimental to these young people. And the stories I've heard they're horrific. What is the administration doing to stop the practice and ensure that all students are treated with respect?
Thanks, Congresswoman. As we talked about, we have an initiative going proactively through all 12 of our regional Office for Civil Rights offices to bring light to this subject to ensure that schools and districts and states know what their responsibilities are, what the law is, and to really make sure that they are doing right on behalf of kids. And so this was a prospective initiative, conducting audits and also conducting a lot of proactive informational sessions to ensure that that schools know what they should be doing or not doing.
One of the and some of it, as I hear, it's a lack of reporting. Is there any enforcement mechanism? So you've been doing the education, and a lot of them should know by now what the rules are around this. What type of enforcement mechanisms do you have, or do you not have any? And what should we be doing to make sure that schools are adhering?
Well, where there are infringements on students' rights and a request for investigation, we are investigating, and I think that's where the important piece comes on the follow-up. But we think and we hope that, again, proactively taking this initiative and bringing more light to this subject is going to bring about laudable results in terms of reporting and in terms of actual activity and action.
Thank you. One of the things I hear a lot about from educators at home in Southwest Washington is lack of resources to address mental health needs. This is probably the top issue I hear about. It's actually more I hear about the mental and emotional health of the students more than I hear about math achievement, reading achievement. I mean, it's ground zero for these educators are doing everything they can, but these kids are coming in with a whole set of challenges that generations before them seem to have navigated or navigated differently. Who knows, right? I don't know why where they are now. We're trying to figure that out. But these kids a lot of them are in real distress. What is or can the department do to help? I mean, this is not in anybody's scope, right? This is not in our scope of practice, but this is the reality of where the kids are at right now.
A couple things I would say. First of all, I think our proposal to block grant to the states and then ultimately the local districts, all of these different programmatic funds would allow each district to address this issue in the way that they prioritize. And if this is indeed the most important issue for their most vulnerable students, that would allow them the flexibility to tap into more of those, a higher percentage of those resources than otherwise through the formula or through the programmatic approach.
So they would be able to maybe hire like an in-school mental health counselor, for example.
If that's what they thought.
I've heard requests for that or SROs, and some of our funds are flexible and some of them just aren't. Or if they're using money for this, they can't then use it for this. What is the feedback?
And that's why I think the block grant proposal is really sort of transformative in that way, because it would allow for all of the uses of those programs, but for them to prioritize the dollars in a way that's going to really meet the needs of the most disadvantaged kids in their district.
And I gotta believe there would be is there an administrative savings? I think one of the problems we have is we send everybody's tax dollars back to DC and headquarters skims it off, and this is in every department, skims off the top and then sends back a lesser amount.
Well, there are, yes. I think ultimately there would be, and I think importantly, that flexibility at the state and local level would really allow those closest to the students to target those resources in the ways that are going to be most meaningful for the kids that they seek to serve.
Okay, with my last 20 seconds, I'm a big supporter of the Running Start programs, would like to see the department support them. In addition, I just wanted to say thank you for the increase in the focus on career and technical education. We should not sell students down the river that you have to go to a four-year liberal arts school, and that's what success is. Because we all know, if you've lived at all in life, that is not the only definition of success. In fact, I know a lot of people who are happy and fulfilled have good living wage jobs with full benefits and are able to provide for their families on a career and technical type of education track. So thank you for the emphasis on that.
Well, the president and myself and this administration are really committed to advancing that and supporting multiple pathways for adult success.
Thank you. Yield back.
Congresswoman Clark.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Secretary DeVos, for being with us today. I want to go back to a topic explored by my colleague, Congresswoman Lee. Do you think that the disparity in discipline for preschoolers of color could indicate a racial bias?
I suppose it certainly could. Again, I think the bigger issue here is that we make sure that every child has the opportunity to pursue an education that is going to unlock and unleash their personal and fullest potential.
Okay. Isn't it, however, the official policy now of the Department of Education that the cause of these disparate rates of discipline that we see with students of color is explained by the fact that these children are just inherently predisposed to misbehave and disrupt the classroom more than white children? Isn't that your policy?
No.
No, it's not. That is the conclusion of the research you cited in your school safety report of 2019. Congress specifically asked you to strike all references to this report, which interestingly appeared in the Journal of Criminal Justice. Your official response within this budget is that you stand by this report and its conclusions. Isn't that right?
Congresswoman, do you have a question about the budget? Because we're here.
That you
we're
did
here
say
to talk about the budget.
in your FY21 budget, you responded that, quote, the Department of Education stands by this report that says children of color are just more inherently inclined to misbehave, and that explains the disparate rates of discipline.
I don't know where that would have fallen in our budget narrative.
We will get you the exact
I would be
section
interested in
because
that.
it's right in your budget. And in fact, I don't see any other way to interpret this as your new policy, because then you went on and eliminated the data collection that could help us solve this problem, because you don't see a problem, because you have adopted as the policy that this is just a race-based problem, that these kids are
In fact,
inherently.
Congresswoman, the CRDC question collection, the data collection questions are open for public comment now. They have not been concluded, and
But this
if
is
you
what
do
you
have- if
propose
do
to
have-
no longer
If
collect.
you do have input, we would be
We
very happy
certainly-
to take
We
that.
certainly would like you to go ahead, undo what you put in your budget, strike this racist research, make sure it's crystal clear that you do not buy into this theory that children of color are disciplined because of who they are and that they come to school with disruptive tendencies. That is what you put in your official report. In your budget, you say you stand by it. Let's move on. I want to give you a chance to correct the record, because I think we've had some testy exchanges in the past. And in 2018, you agreed that private and religious schools receiving federal funding would have to have non-discrimination policies. But I think I browbeat you into that answer. Is there any requirement that private and religious schools must have non-discrimination policies under your EFS voucher program?
The Education Freedom Scholarship Program, first of all, is a tax credit. They are not
Is there any
federal funds.
non-discrimination? I did not see it in your
And,
budget proposal.
And the reality is that every student that would take advantage of an Education Freedom Scholarship would be protected. Their civil rights are protected, and that is true of students no matter where they are in whatever school.
But I am correct, that you do not have that non-discrimination requirement in your budget proposal. And in
The budget
September-
proposal is part of Treasury's budget, and it's only
But you
mentioned in
agreed
our
that it
budget.
would, but it's not there. In September, you visited a religious school in Harrisburg that, as a private religious institution, is certainly allowed to do what they do. They have policies that transgender children can be expelled or denied admission based on that status. They also have different tuition rates depending on the religion of the children. My question to you is, if Pennsylvania adopted your scholarship program, your voucher program, would this school be eligible for federal funding with these policies in place? If approved.
Ma'am, I need to correct you on the nature of the Education Freedom Scholarship proposal. It is a federal tax credit that would be the recipient of
Are you saying
voluntary.
that federal
Can I
tax-
finish? Can I finish?
I just want to, we are out of time, so I just want
Well,
to be
and-
clear
And
that
I want to make sure that you have full understanding of what the proposal is.
I
A
understand
federal
tax credits
credit.
are federal funding.
No, they're not, because
they
they are
are.
voluntary contributions in advance of paying your taxes to the federal government.
That would
They are
be
direct
a-
contributions to 501c3 charitable organizations as designated by states that choose to participate.
We are out of time, and I'm going to leave you with this. You said in your testimony you wanted to expand educational freedom for students. I certainly hope that making these inherently discriminatory policies part of the Department of Education is not what you meant by that statement.
We don't discriminate against anyone at any time.
Congresswoman Frankel.
Okay. I'm going to follow up. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it. I want to follow up on these voucher questions. So, because I was trying to just calculate in my head, because for me, I think this is a program for wealthy people to get free private school, because my understanding of a tax credit is you actually, if you owe $10,000 in taxes, and under your scenario, and you pay, let's say, $10,000 for a private school, then you owe no taxes. Is that
No,
right?
Congresswoman, can I just interject? Because
Yes,
that
please.
is,
Okay,
that is
explain that to me.
absolutely a misunderstanding
Okay,
of
well,
the
just
proposal.
explain so we know.
The proposal is voluntary contributions from individuals or businesses to 501c3 scholarship granting organizations that would then give scholarships to families as defined by the state that decides to participate. And in most states where there are education freedom, school choice programs, they are geared and targeted to primarily low-income families, many times also students with disabilities, and they are programs for students who are most vulnerable and most disadvantaged. And so it would be individuals who choose to help other students and other families who would voluntarily make those contributions. It is not a program for people of wealth.
Okay.
People of wealth already have choices.
Correct.
People of power already have choices. All of these policies are designated for and are targeted toward individuals and families who don't have that power.
Okay,
who are
all
assigned
right.
to schools
I'm
that
gonna
are not working
okay,
for them.
I want to reclaim my time to just follow up on Representative Clark's question. Is there anything in your proposal that requires non-discrimination? So, for example, can somebody keep a gay student out, or can they discriminate on the basis of a religion?
The key with school choice and education freedom is families and students voluntarily choose the place that works and fits
all right,
for
so I
them.
just want to understand this. So they can choose to go to a school that only allows a certain religion or a certain gender or a certain race. Is that correct?
Many schools have unique
The
missions,
answer
different
is-
missions.
The answer is yes. Thank you. I answered it for you. Okay, so I have another question. I think coming out soon is a new rule that in reference to Title IX on sexual harassment and violence in colleges. Is that rule going to be published soon?
I expect it will be soon, yes.
So I think you probably know that there's a lot of concern from folks about what this is going to mean, because all the statistics so forth show that there's still a lot of sexual violence on campuses, and there's a lot of concern that your new rule is going to actually discourage victims from coming forward. There's one particular point that I do want to ask you about, and maybe you can just clarify it, because I don't understand it I read that rule, it's so long. Under the proposed rule, alleged harassment must occur within the school's own program or activity. So my question is whether or not that would cover off-campus, for example, frat houses. Would it pertain to online sexual harassment?
Well, ma'am, because the rule is not yet finalized nor published, I can't comment on it.
Well,
It
the
would
way-
not be appropriate to
well-
comment, and it would not be appropriate to, yeah, you're going to ask a first question, and then you're going to ask another. It's not appropriate to comment.
Okay,
The
but-
rule is not yet final.
So is the rule, as you understand, proposed, as it's proposed, is it going to cover, for example, a sexual assault at a frat house that's off campus, or online harassment and bullying?
Again, I cannot comment
All
on the
right, well, that's
specifics
really
of the
sad.
rule.
Okay, my final question is, you know, we just read that Japan is closing all its schools because of the coronavirus. So I'd like to know what plans you are making in regards to coronavirus.
Good question. I've convened a task force within the department and have asked my Deputy Secretary, Mick Zace, to head that task force to ensure we have our continuance policies and every plan in place for work in and through the department. And we continue to work with the other agencies across government to ensure that we are prepared to respond and react and do as we should.
Okay,
depending
thank you.
on-
I'm happy to hear that you're doing that. I just hope that you will keep us informed. And I yield back.
Congresswoman Watson Coleman? Do you want it? I can have Congresswoman Lowey go first, this first round, is that what you want to do?
Actually, I would if you just, yeah, I just need a
Congresswoman
moment.
Lowey.
Thank you. I mentioned the full-service community schools before. I think that they are so critical to bringing together health, social support, family, community engagement, early childhood development opportunities to really help students and their families thrive. Yet you propose eliminating dozens of K-12 programs, including community schools. We came together on a bipartisan basis in this Congress to authorize the full-service community school program in 2015 because we know its value in the district. First of all, I'd like to know, have you ever visited a full-service community school?
I've visited many schools. Maybe one of them has been termed that. But Congresswoman or Chairwoman, if I could just say, it's inaccurate to say that we have proposed eliminating these programs. We have proposed rolling them all up into a block grant. And I think your example of the school that you've cited and admire is exactly why we should consider the block grant proposal, because it would allow schools and districts in your state to actually expand on those and target those resources in that direction if that's the right answer for the students in that district or in that region. It would give a lot more flexibility to states and communities, not eliminating anything, but putting it in one big
With
pool.
less money.
Well, the request is at the level that it is. You are the appropriators. You'll decide at what level to fund. I think
that
the
level,
important,
that's for sure.
I think the important thing is the policy here. And the proposal, the policy proposal is to put all of those programs together in one block grant that would then allow the most local level, those closest to the students, to target the resources to meet the needs of the kids that are most vulnerable in that school district in a way that's going to uniquely meet their needs.
However, you're decreasing the amount of money in the pot so that you're making schools really compete against each other for these dollars. So I'm hoping as we go through the budget, we will increase those dollars so we can sustain programs like this. And I think you'd be interested in visiting some of those schools. I'd be happy to give you a tour if you
Thank you.
come up to Westchester. Now, after-school program, your budget eliminates funding for after-school programs.
No, it includes it in the block grant.
You're decreasing the pot of money and putting everything in the
Putting it
block
all into a
grant.
block grant to allow for flexibility at the local school district level.
But if you're cutting the budget.
Well, again,
cutting the
you're the
budget.
appropriator, so you decide at what level to fund it. But I think the important thing is the proposal to put all of them together in a block grant and allow for states and local districts to make decisions on which,
Okay,
what
when-
programs are most effective and what is going to work best to meet the needs of the most vulnerable students in that district.
With less money, I get it. But let me just say this, because I think it's important and you probably know it. The amount of federal funds going to districts is usually about 10%. I don't know if it's.
It's actually less than 5%.
Less, probably about 9% of the budget.
It's
So
less
you're
than
saying
5, but-
putting all these programs in a pot, decreasing the fund, everything's going to be fine. But I think that's where we have a real disagreement. And you're saying we're the appropriators, but if you are the Secretary of Education, your opinion is valued. And it disappoints me that you would take all these good programs, say, put them in a pot, and then, okay, decrease the dollars. But we'll move on because it's almost completed. Did anyone ask this one? Okay. I'm sorry, there are a couple of hearings going on.
I understand. I
I'm
think I was
running
in the
from one-
hold room in the other one.
Yes. Okay. Now, another favorite program of mine, maybe this is in the pot too, but I think it's really worth your seeing, is the C Campus program. More than 1 in 5 college students is a parent. For those with a young child, accessing childcare on campus can really make all the difference. And the struggle to get good childcare is reality, frankly, for a growing number of college students. Not every college campus, I have to get to the question. Oh, yeah. Sorry about that. What do you think? Are you aware of the
I
value
am
of
aware
the
of it,
C Campus
and
program?
I know what our budget proposal has advanced, but I also know that the Health and Human Services budget really contains the increased funding around childcare. This is certainly a priority of the administration, and we believe that those programs through HHS would definitely be able to meet the needs that of the program that you've cited as well.
Well, I'm out of time, but let me just say, if the $3 million cut you propose were to take place, programs like this would disappear because the locals have the major responsibility, and our work is invaluable, and our money is invaluable in supporting their efforts. Oh, that's 30, did I say that? A $38 million cut, but thank you so much.
But like I said, HHS has the bulk of the child care budget proposal funds, and that's where the administration has put the priority around child care. And let me just say, if you're going back to the transport, I like the color to look at in transportation better than here, just a little aside. It's a really pretty green on the wall.
We'll take it into consideration and put some pictures up,
I was so
too, one of
busy
these days.
focusing on the issue, I didn't notice the color.
Congresswoman Watson Coleman.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman, and thank you, Secretary DeVos. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions regarding the reduction in investment in our children under your proposed budget. I'm really concerned about the achievement gap as well as you are, and I just maybe don't agree with our approach to it. The achievement gap that you talk about exists, I think, in part because schools lack equitable discipline guidance in addition to other resources. And students of color are disproportionately targeted for discipline and kept out of school, which prevents their learning. Further, there's a gross lack of accountability from your department in ensuring that the school districts across the country live up to their mission. Let's talk first about the discipline piece. Just this week, a 6-year-old girl in Florida was arrested and taken from her school, even though school officials maintain they did not want the girl arrested. This is an all too common issue for our black children. According to the Civil Rights Data Collection, black K through 12 students are nearly 4 times as white kids to receive out-of-school suspensions. Black students are nearly twice as likely to be expelled from school without education services compared to their white counterparts. This data is disconcerting because students who were suspended or expelled for a disciplinary violation were almost 3 times as likely to be in contact with the juvenile justice system in the next year. How do we reconcile this disparity with the a percentage of population Black students represent, yet the percentage of discipline? And given that you have rescinded the guidance that was intended to give the school tools to break the school to prison pipeline, I hope that's what it was intended for. What are your plans to ensure that schools are safe and welcoming environments that don't unfairly punish or discriminate children? Bottom line is, what kind of resources do you envision providing through your requests to schools to address this issue?
So, Congresswoman, thank you for that question. And you cited up at the top your concern about the achievement gap, and I share that concern and have shared that concern for the 3+ decades that I've been working to change policy to free up children who haven't been able to achieve because of being stuck in a school that doesn't work for them. And I think you may have misstated when you said you don't agree with our approach, meaning your approach. I, too, don't agree with your approach with continuing to do the same thing with more and more resources and expect a different result. That's why our proposal has suggested taking virtually all of the elementary and secondary education funding from the federal level and block granting it to the states, and then they, in formula, to the local districts to allow for the greatest amount of flexibility to directly address the needs of the students in that district and in that school. And I think this is an important...
Excuse me, did that include alternatives to a public option?
No, this would be the funding from the federal government for all of the elementary and secondary education programs, and it would be granted to the states and formulated out under the Title I formulation, so 90+% of it going to local districts, but it would allow the local districts the kind of flexibility they don't have today. It would free up tons of hours, literally 225 years of time in complying with and writing reports, and would allow them to target those resources directly to the kids who need it most.
Well, I certainly agree that teachers are required to do a lot of paperwork that just takes time away from their teaching. I want to talk to you about something else that concerns me in the budget, which I think is a reflection of our values, or your values, or the president's values. The budget eliminates 41 programs and cuts a number of other...
No, it doesn't. It takes them all and puts them into the block grant and allows flexibility at the state and local level. So it's not eliminating them.
So it is...
29 of them.
It is putting more programs in one box with a limited amount of money, asking them to already compete with one another for...
No,
so they
wouldn't be competing. They wouldn't be competing. They're formula granted out. 90% of the funds...
Let's talk about the TRIO program. Talk to me about the TRIO program. Oh. All right. I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Sure. We have proposed combining the TRIO and Gear Up functions in the TRIO program. And again, coupled with the flexibility that the block grant for the other 29 programs would afford state and local districts, if there's more desired to be spent in the area of what the TRIO programs are doing, it would allow, again, more personalization for the students that are closest, for those closest to the students in each school district.
All right, I seek unanimous consent to enter some testimonials from our students in the TRIO program, which has been so vitally important, which I think is not getting the appropriate attention that it should. Thank you, Madam Secretary.
I think in a bipartisan way, there is agreement on your comment, and so we'll put the information into the record. We're going to do another round, but it's in 2 minutes, so that we can move quickly. I just might add, if you have not seen the video of this 6-year-old child being put in handcuffs, pleading for not to have handcuffs. That is a visual of what my colleagues are talking about, which is what's just happening to particularly African-American kids and kids of color in preschool, sobbing not to be put in handcuffs at 6 years old. Anyway, I just a quick question. The Accrediting Council for Independent Colleges and Schools, ACICS, lost its accreditation 2016, demonstrated extraordinary lack of compliance, weak record in monitoring enforcement, standards below the department's requirements. 2018, you reinstated it. It is in financial peril, lost its former accredited institutions, not recognized by the Council for Higher Education, uncovered by USA Today, that ACICS accredited Reagan National University, an institution, no campus, no staff, students or alumni. What is the department doing to ensure that students are not being duped by deceitful for-profit colleges accredited by an agency that you reinstated? Will you consider reversing your decision to reinstate?
Well, Chairwoman, I was troubled by reading that piece as well and have directed that an investigation ensue to see what's going on there. I was not happy to read that.
So you would be willing to?
We have an investigation launched and we're on it.
Okay, and decision to reinstate. That's I thank you for that. I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm yielding.
Thank you very much. I know we've got just a little time here. So just quickly, Madam Secretary, information. I've had some questions on charter schools. I'd like to submit them for the record. You made your position very clear, and I appreciate that very much, and your record's well known. But I do have some concerns on the set of just, what would happen to the money that we've gone so far. Second area that I have enormous sympathy with you in terms of this whole student loan problem, and commend you, honestly, for trying to think through different ways to deal with it. In full disclosure, I was not very happy when we moved away from the loan guarantee approach. We sort of kept this out of your bailiwick, and we have really saddled you with an enormous problem and under-resourced the problem, frankly, for a number of years. Again, as I said in my earlier comments, I'm not sure we really have the power to do much here. I mean, it's really an authorizing function, I think, for the most part. But I am very curious about what you're doing now to try and combat this. I know you're doing some technology things, so I'd like to know what your efforts are. And again, if you'd like to expound longer term as to what you think the ideal solution would be, because we sort of put the federal government on the hook in a way that I don't think we ever should have in terms of this. And we've turned this into an extraordinary political issue that presidential candidates kick around. And I would like to get the department out of the middle of this crossfire if there's some way to do it going forward. So your thoughts would be most welcome.
Sure. Well, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, it's a very large and complex issue. And I think we spend a lot of time talking about the loans and the debt that students are taking on, not quite as much time challenging why the cost of higher education continues to skyrocket. And, there's a lot of theory around that, but our budget proposal does suggest capping off the amount that graduate students can take out in student loans through the federal government and capping out the amount that, importantly, that parents can take. We know that there have been all too many parents that have taken out loans in greater than they are able to really afford, and Social Security being garnished as a result. But graduate students, we have over, yeah.
Thank you very much. First, to my colleagues on the other side, let me just say this to you, and I appreciate your comments, but when many of us started public schools, schools were segregated. We could not go to public schools. Got it? In 2017, we asked the Secretary to submit a report about the resegregation of our public schools. To date, that report has not been submitted. So I cannot be nice when I ask about this, because this is serious for our Black and brown students, and many of us understand the role of the federal government in desegregation of public schools. Now, Madam Secretary, let me ask you about the budget as it relates to expanding Pell Grants for incarcerated students. You said you supported that, but I can't find in your budget request any line item for that. Have you estimated how much it would cost, and do you plan to request funding for this?
Well, we have made the request to have Congress consider a permanent expansion because it's not a program other than a pilot through the department currently. There isn't a specific piece of budgetary guidance to suggest with it.
So what do we need to do to get you to do that, to submit a line item for us?
Well, I think Congress needs to act and make Second Chance Pell a program.
So we have to authorize it?
It's
Okay.
currently just an experimental program through our authorities in the department.
Okay, so we'll work on that. Let me ask you about HBCUs, because this budget doesn't increase funding for HBCUs, except those that are in the opportunity zones, which leaves out about 50% of the HBCUs. So let me ask you about that, because we know that the president has touted his support for HBCUs, yet we see a budget that level funds our historically black colleges.
Well, I would just say that that is definitely indication of continued support for the important role HBCUs play, and that we've
But 50% won't be included in this.
But the level funding for the remainder of the HBCU-related programs is also an indication of the priority that we have placed on that. And then an $150 million plus up for HBCUs and other minority-serving institutions for STEM-related programs in opportunity zones, which opportunity zones are all across the country in
I know, and leaves
rural
out
and
50%
urban
of
areas.
HBCUs. Thank you, Madam Secretary.
Thank you again, Madam Secretary. And Madam Chair, without objection, I'd move to include the May 2019 Harvard Kennedy School poll, EdNext poll, into the record. Good. Madam Secretary, let's just clear up something about these education freedom scholarships. Just like, when I write a check to my church every week, and it's tax deductible, I'm assuming my church is using it, there's something religious associated with. So the idea of having some tax preference for someone who actually has a religious bent is not a new concept. Is that right?
That's correct.
Thank you. Okay, now let's talk about the May 2019 Harvard Kennedy School poll that looked at school choice and looked at tax credits and most importantly, vouchers for low-income students. The fact of the matter is that by 49 to 41%, all the people they sampled approve it. But the most interesting thing, and I'm ashamed that Republicans only have 44%, Democrats 52%, but the reason why the Democrats actually prefer it more is because African-American Democrats have 70% approval for low-income vouchers, and Hispanic Democrats 67%.
That's right.
Now, the fact of the matter is that these parents, these people, the people who actually are most concerned with their students, with their children's education outcome, actually want low-income vouchers. And I would suggest it's a soft bigotry of low expectations that somehow we're not going to provide it to them because we know better. To quote a candidate who's now the president, I have a suspicion that a lot of those parents are asking themselves the question, what do I have to lose? I yield back.
Congressman Pocan.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman, and thank you again. I'm going to try to channel my inner John Molinar, who always has grace in his demeanor. So I will try to do that. I think the difficulty is I'm a product of public schools. I grew up in a lower middle class neighborhood. Recently, we sold my aging mom's house for about $115,000. People like me got our opportunity to get where we got because of public education. So I'm very passionate about public education, and many of these schools, because they discriminate, as a gay kid, I wouldn't have been able to go to, or I would have been beat up. So honestly, I take that very personal, and I think I'm going to enter
May I just comment to that as well?
Please.
I also am very passionate about public schools. I'm passionate about all schools that serve kids and that are good fits for kids, and I'm agnostic to what comes before schools.
I got you. If I can just ask my question, because I have the 2 minutes, and left in 2 minutes, 1 minute left. What are we doing, though, to go after those tax dollars that we've lost that have gone to these failed charter schools, the ones that haven't opened or have failed. Are we doing anything to get
Well,
that money back?
again, that report has been totally debunked.
But there are failed schools,
It is riddled with inaccuracies.
Sure, but that's not this is the frustration, right? When I ask a question, don't answer a different one, please.
It was
Madam Secretary?
like 1.5% of the total number of schools that didn't open. And I will
Do
be
we
happy to
go
get
after
back
those
with
dollars?
you. I will be
That's
happy to
fine.
look into that further and get back with you on the disposition of
I
those.
accept that as an answer. Thank you very much. Follow up on the for-profit colleges. I know that you got rid of a program that was in the Obama administration that protected students who had these failed colleges on their loans. 18 states have had to sue the Department of Education about this loan forgiveness. A federal judge recently said the Department of Education was not following that order and was fined $100,000. I guess my question is, what are we doing to collect those payments? Are we still collecting payments from defrauded students, and are we going to try to take care of those students and their
So every student that has filed what's called a borrower defense claim was put in forbearance at that time. Like before, when I got to my job, there was no process, and I said, it's going to take a while to figure out the process. Let's make sure these students aren't incurring any more interest, aren't having to pay any more on their student loan as long as their claims are in process. And so that has been the case on all of those claims that are not yet closed. Now, we've been stymied a couple of steps along the way by procedural rulings in court. We're still waiting for the 9th District to rule on a methodology, but nothing pains me more than to not be able to resolve those completely.
Great. I'll follow up. Thank you.
Molinar.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and again, thank you, Madam Secretary, for being here. I want to talk with you a little bit about the block grants, because I think that's an important concept that it's kind of hard to get our hands around. So if I understand what you're saying is you're taking some of the federally mandated spending programs, you're consolidating it together into a flexible spending program that states and local school districts are going to have the ability to determine. So, for instance, if one local community said they wanted to focus on school safety, they could use those funds for that.
Correct.
And if one said, hey, we think career and college counseling should be part of it, they could use it for that.
Correct.
Mental health counselors, as my colleague had mentioned, you could use it for these needs that are identified kind of on the ground where people are saying, hey, this is really what our school district needs.
Well, and recalling that most of these programs, and including and especially Title I, were created to really help the most disadvantaged students. And I go back to my opening statement where I said $1 trillion spent over the last 40 years to close the achievement gap. Hasn't closed one bit, has opened in many cases for lots of kids, particularly at the low end of the spectrum. And so let's do something different. Let's allow for that flexibility to translate down to the local level so they can target those dollars where the students need it most.
Thank you. And then in terms of the dollar amount, because I know whenever we're talking budgets, people are upset about different spending levels. Ultimately, your point is Congress is going to determine what spending level is in that.
Correct. The administration has advanced this budget proposal. The important part, the policy part here about the block grant, I think is the really important piece to consider.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To follow up, your last statement to me is we do not discriminate against children. Is that correct?
We uphold all of the laws of this land and are, yes.
Okay. So if we're operating on a non-discrimination basis, which I think is the absolutely appropriate role for you to take, I hope that you will rescind on page E8 of the Safe School Citizen Education FY21 budget request, where you said you stand by that racist research. I will look forward to you reversing course from that position in your budget. And we can have a long discussion about tax credits and Treasury, and I understand tax credits, and you and I disagree, apparently, that tax credits are federal funding. but will you, as Secretary of Education, who has just said you will not allow children to be discriminated by race, religion, transgender status, sexual orientation, will you guarantee to me, to the children of this country, that however funded this program that is in your budget, that is $5 billion of taxpayer money, when it is rolled out in states, will you guarantee that every single school will have a non-discrimination policy in order to qualify for that?
Well, Congresswoman, this is not proposed to be a federal program. This is proposed to be a federal tax credit that doesn't.
Will you guarantee?
Let me finish. The legislation is specifically for states to create programs that are going to meet the needs of the most vulnerable and needy students in their state.
So we're right back to where we were.
We are right back to the reality of the fact that this program is to be implemented and designed at the state level, voluntarily contributed to by federal taxpayers.
So I'm going to be clear that you have corrected the record when you said to me that you, as Secretary of Education, would ensure that this program would only go to schools with non-discrimination policies. That is no longer your stance. This is a state's choice that you will not do that as Secretary of Education.
Ma'am, may I just suggest that you're mixing up and you're not staying clear on the purpose of this program, which is to help students get a great education in a place that fits for them.
To say that you would stand up for kids is appalling, and you really should resign.
Congresswoman Herrera Butler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would love to have a little bit more clarification on the Opportunity Scholarship or the Federal Freedom Opportunity Choice Program, because I do want to make sure it's on the record very clearly whether it's a new program, whether it's federal funding, and whether there are strings attached, and actually too whether by somehow, and I recognize it's Treasury's program, but is there some way that this is not under the laws of the land? Are civil rights or constitutional rights somehow abridged with starting this program?
Let me respond to that directly first. No, civil rights are not abridged in any way, period. What this does is it's not a new program to be administered at the federal level. It's merely a vehicle to effectively and efficiently get voluntary contributions directly to scholarship granting organizations as decided by states that choose to participate, with the idea that they're going to turn around and create one or more programs that are going to specifically address the needs of K-12 students in their state.
So no more than giving money to Planned Parenthood, which is a 501c3, or your church, which is tax exempt, this is no more federal funding than it is any money that,
correct,
right? Because churches aren't federally funded.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
I think there's a pretty big divide there. The other, I can't tell if it's going down. So the other thing is it going up or down? The other thing I wanted to ask about are there opportunities in the department with regard to encouraging students to participate in dual credit programs like Running Start? That's one way I think we're going to help them with their college costs.
Well, I think our proposal is to dramatically increase funding for career and technical education. And I think importantly, this comes at a time when states have been writing their Perkins 5 plans and are about getting ready to implement it. I've visited a lot of schools that have fledgling dual enrollment programs, many that want to have many more and expand them dramatically. I expect that that's going to continue to be a growing reality, and certainly those places that are being forward-leaning and recognizing the opportunities for their students are going to get that right.
Thank you.
Congresswoman Frankel.
Thank you. I just want to I'm going to follow up on Ms. Clark's question. First of all, I just want to say one of my colleagues compared the tax credit to a tax deduction. I think it's a big difference. I mean, you would agree with that. A tax credit is you take your certain percentage of what you owe, and you, instead of paying it to the federal government, you're giving it to a private school.
No, you get to give it directly, effectively, and efficiently
To a private school.
Not to a private school,
Okay,
to
okay.
a scholarship granting
Okay.
organization.
Okay, to a, let's.
That
this
it's
is
a
semantic.
501c3.
Got it.
A nonprofit scholarship granting organization, and a state that chooses to participate
Right, exactly.
could,
So,
could
you know, I
decide
just
to
want to tell you
expand
something.
career and technical
Let me tell you
education.
something. The state of Florida where I'm from, they've been having this program, and
Very successfully.
no,
I
not
might
very
add.
successfully. In fact, I just read an article where 3 banks that had been contributing have now pulled out because they found that there are 156 schools in Florida that are discriminating against people who are LGBTQ. So here's what I say. You know, we have a different philosophy. I just want to say this. I think it is a mistake, I believe, for you to come in here to cut $6 billion, to ask for a cut of $6 billion out of public education, and then at the same time ask us or ask this Congress to set up a program so that whether it's a corporation or a person, a total of $5 billion can now go, instead of to the federal government to pay taxes, to some scholarship program that they could put money into a private institution that discriminates against people. So
But,
I think that's a mistake.
Ma'am,
I want to say
isn't education about kids?
No, yes, education is
Okay.
about, I'll tell you something, the great equalizer in life is a good public education.
It's
I wanna-
a good
I wanna
education,
say
yes.
one other thing I want to say, which is this. I am very disappointed that, I want to try to say this nicely. Okay. I'm very disappointed that you feigned ignorance today about a dangerous new policy on campus violence. I'm very, very worried about that, and I don't understand why you couldn't.
Well,
be
ma'am, I'm not
straight-
ignorant about it. I told you,
you
we're
didn't
not,
answer the
we have
question.
not released the final rule, and it would not be appropriate for me to comment.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Public education is a great equalizer. And the reason the federal government has a role in public education was to guarantee that children were protected, that opportunities were available, that there was equality and equity of the educational delivery system. And it's not about alternatives to that system. We have a responsibility to make that system work for all the children. And it concerns me. I asked you a question: how do you reconcile the disproportionate discipline of minority students in school, the suspensions, et cetera, and even the arresting of a 6-year-old in schools without your questioning why that is happening? And then one other thing, Madam Secretary, anytime the federal government puts money into one of these school districts, you can require that there be a non-discrimination program. You've got a responsibility to require that there's not discrimination against children, whether or not they're Black, Latino, or part of the LGBTQ communities. That is your responsibility. But you don't seem to give one good hoot about public education. Every time we talk about public education, you talk about education. And when you talk about education, you talk about the alternatives that you think work. Well, let me tell you, one of the reasons that our children are not achieving to the extent that they are intellectually capable of doing so is because we're not putting the resources where they need to be in the public school system. And until we can reconcile that, you all don't have any right to talk about improving the system. I yield back.
Madam Chairwoman, could I just comment on that?
Question. Congressman Cole, if you want to just try to wrap up your comments, and I will wrap up, and then we will bring this hearing to a close.
Well, it's been another eventful day at Labor H, Madam Chair. I want to begin, Madam Secretary, by thanking you. I want to thank you for the service that you render this country each and every day.
Thank you.
I've known you for a long time. I agree with my friend, Mr. Molinar. I don't know anybody that cares more about young people getting a good education than you. And you have a lifetime of commitment, service, and generosity, as does your family. to demonstrate that. And so while we may have disagreements on particular programs, any of us up here, you and I have a couple, it doesn't diminish one whit from the enormous sacrifice and service that you and your family have given people of all races, all colors, every ethnicity, every background for many, many, many years. And I consider your service as secretary to be an extension of that, quite frankly. Second, I really want to applaud you on this career and technical education initiative, both the additional money for the institutions in question that you've proposed. I think it's a very wise investment. And I particularly appreciate you taking the lead and putting on front, because we've got a lot of students that would benefit from this kind of education that can't afford what are even very modest fees as a rule. So your willingness to look at the Pell Grant as an extension, we all want kids that want to get college education to have that opportunity. It's one of the reasons why I'm fierce about TRIO and Gear Up and some of these other programs. But I also recognize the vast majority of young people aren't going to go for a four-year college. They either don't want to, or that's just not the right approach for them. And I think sometimes we forget about them a lot. And in this proposal, I think you're actually putting the focus on folks that are too often forgotten, and you and the president are to be commended for that, because he's been a leader. He actually took things like the apprentice program, which was a good Obama proposal, and put more money into that. This has been a very consistent theme in his tenure and in your tenure, and I appreciate that. Finally, again, I want to continue the dialogue on a variety of programs, and would love to invite you sometime. I'd love you to. I was particularly pleased with your proposal on Second Chance Pell. I've been to Tulsa Community College and seen that program. They do outstanding work. Thank you very much for mentioning them. It will surprise, delight, and thrill them no end. But I think more importantly, it's part of our population, again, that gets neglected and left behind. And you putting a searchlight on it and say, let's help people that have had misfortune and made mistakes get back on the right track in life and give them an opportunity to make a decent living. It's really a good thing. Last thing I will commit to you, I'm going to wrestle with this student loan problem, because I see it as a real issue, and I'm glad you mentioned the telling point about the cost of college as well. This isn't just a matter of the federal government. We have a lot of private institutions that need to think very carefully about how they counsel students and what they encourage them to do, and frankly, the advice sometimes they don't give them as to what the appropriate level of debt, if any, should be for them. And then finally, the administration of this, and you rightly point out, it frustrated me when I was chairman. I'm sure it frustrates our chairman, the amount of resources that are getting put into looking after this. Again, my personal view is we made a big mistake when we got out of the loan guarantee business and dumped this over at the Department of Education and asked you to take on a mission that really, in my view, probably should not be your mission. So your thoughts as you grapple with this are very valuable. Finally, Madam Chairman, I want to thank you. You're always a great working partner, and I appreciate the way that you manage our committee. And we occasionally have differences, but we very seldom have deep disagreements about the tasks in front of us. So I look forward to working with you as we craft this budget and the other budgets that are under our jurisdiction. And I know, as always, we'll find a lot more common ground than we do differences. Can't commit to vote for your first bill, but if we can come to an agreement in conference, I think we can do it again. Thank you.
I want to thank the gentleman. It has really been an extraordinary, positive. It's a working experience, but it's a friendship. For that, I am deeply, deeply grateful, because it's that friendship that allows us to get the business of the country done, and that's why we're all here, and we believe in that. I just want to say one thing, Madam Secretary. I got a couple of items, but the couple of comments that my colleagues have made with regard to this notion that states can take, if they're taking public money in whatever form, and they discriminate, that will be up to the states. You may not want to take on that issue, and though we all believe you have that authority, but we are not going to stand by and watch states discriminate against our children in terms of proceeding to get an education. Let me mention on Puerto Rico, if I can. I want to take the time to acknowledge the continued struggles of children in Puerto Rico. They have been really dealing with trying to recover from earthquakes, from all kinds of disasters, still from Hurricane Maria. I have been told, and we'll look into this, that kids are going to school in tents. I don't know if you've been or your staff has been to the island, but I would ask you to do that and to see these conditions and really to urge the administration to support the House supplemental bill. It's really imperative. When I was there for Maria, children were afraid to go to school because if they went to school, they were fearful that when they went home, their parents would not be there. We are dealing with both education and we are dealing with mental health issues regarding these children. And I think we all believe we have a moral responsibility in this area. And finally, let me just say, there's been a lot of discussion about the K through 12 education programs. My view, I think the view of my colleagues, is that you propose to eliminate these programs, replace them with one block grant, in your words, eliminate federal burdens that have been, in a quote, have inhibited innovation. I'm concerned, Madam Secretary, that you confuse essential protections for children across all the formula programs as burdens. One of this nation's most urgent charges is to address the achievement gap between English learners and their native English-speaking peers. As a condition of receiving Title III, states, districts need to provide effective language instruction programs, professional development for teachers of English learners, parents, family, community engagement. From the testimony, it appears that you look at the Elementary and Secondary Education Act and you see a law full of formula grants that place burdens on states. However, I look at the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, I see a law full of vital protections for the most vulnerable students in our nation's care. English learners, homeless children and youth, migrant children, children in the juvenile justice system, and the list goes on. We need to be absolutely clear, and the department, and you are the department, should be straight with the nation's parents and educators. Let them know which ones of the vital protections and safeguards are going to be rolled back. My final comment is, and the ranking member mentioned this, that maybe not your budget, but an OMB budget, but it's your job. You defend the budget, and year after year you defend cuts and question the effectiveness of federal investments in public education. And this year, defending the proposal to eliminate, we can have all the words possible, but we eliminate 41 programs. Last year, we talked about the 2020 request. I asked whether your request to OMB in September included cuts to Special Olympics, and we didn't get a straight answer then. Long and the short of it, Special Olympics is not cut this time around. But examine the cuts. What the department and what the administration are doing with regard to the cuts. And it's not so much, and this is where I come down. I am quite frankly tired of just saying, $40 million in a cut here, $26 million in a cut there. It is about the consequences. It's about what the effect of those cuts are on our children. And I think we both, from your perspective and from ours, have to be understanding of that opportunity to achieve your dreams and your aspirations through education are being curtailed, and in particular for the most vulnerable of our kids, and kids who are in rural districts, kids who are in high poverty areas, that won't get the kind of attention that they need. And I do believe it's a moral responsibility to utilize all the power of the federal government to engage with these communities and these students. So my hope is that we will come forward with a bill in the education area that will meet their needs, and we can do that on a bipartisan basis. I thank you for being here, and thank you for the work that you do on behalf of the country's
Thank you,
children.
Chairwoman.
Thank you. The hearing is concluded. Thank you.